Alright. I know I'm late here, but recently I decided to pick up the Bioshock trilogy as it was on sale for dirt nasty low. Now, even though the series is wrapped up, it doesn't matter the age of the game when it's your first experience with it. Whether you're like me and want to know if it's worth the playthrough or a bio veteran, let's dive right into the video. So, to make things easy for myself, I decided I would review each game in it individually, as one bad experience shouldn't ruin a good, especially if that good experience is 99% of the time. Also, take note that I did play the remastered options of all three games because I could. Starting off with the original Bioshock, I hadn't a clue what I was getting myself into. The opening was confusing and the initial gameplay loop felt, well, average. But as I let the narrative of the game take hold of me and stopped actively judging, things got real, and they got real fast. Suddenly, I shock an enemy and give him the old 1-2 with my wrench. Then I get access to your usual assortments of weapons, and then bam, once again, I got ammunition that can shock. That can make enemies catch on fire. That can explode after a certain duration. The list just goes on and on. In terms of just gameplay, Bioshock did a really great job keeping me entertained with new weapons, ammunition, and plasmids. There are some tight situations when your aim is as garbage as mine, but no one wants to play a game where you just destroy everything in one shot anyways. Exploration in this game is also satisfying. While the areas aren't these massive bland landscapes, they offer lots of goodies for the player to find if you actively seek them out. Nothing makes me happier than ignoring the next part of the story to head down a long winding path to find a weapon upgrade station waiting for me. Or simply looking at a nook and cranny for extra first aid kits. It's these small details that really add to the fun. Story-wise, the game is done quite smooth. There are a few cutscenes where you're locked in as a player, meaning you must just sit through that scene, but for most of the game, the story and the tidbits of the characters you meet along the way are fed to you via audio recordings. As a guy that plays a lot of JRPGs, having the story done like this was a welcome break. Much like my initial gameplay thoughts, the story of why you are down in Rapture seems unimportant or a bit generic, but tactfully the game introduces more and more reasons to keep you going through it. Then suddenly, the doors get busted down on you and they hit you with some smug stuff. I want to keep it spoiler free, people, but yeah, it's not the over the top big brain twist of the century, but it's more than enough to keep you buckled to your seat and be like, yeah, I gotta finish this game now. Not to mention the added lore of the little sisters and big daddies. While not scary, facing off against them can be quite fun, especially when you figure out how to cheese those bastards. Honestly, for a game that came out in 2007, even in 2022, the original Bioshock is a great game if you're interested in that type of gameplay. Bioshock 2 offers a different but familiar addition to the Bioshock universe in comparison to the original. In many ways, it keeps the traditional formula that made Bioshock 1 such a good game and improves on them. There have been a lot of quality of life things added to the game, with some minor changes here and there, but overall, it is still a highly polished game. My only issue with the base game is it feels more so like an extension to the original Bioshock and not necessarily a sequel. There is no interesting twist in the story, but instead one based heavily on lore, which to be honest, I'm fine with. After finishing the game, I will admit I did feel a bit cheated. It started off with a strong influence from the first game, but as you progress, it starts to take up its own roots. I wouldn't say that this was enough to save it in my eyes until... Yes, until I played the DLC called Minerva's Den. To my surprise with how old the game is, some people I know didn't even know Bioshock 2 had a DLC to begin with. Minerva's Den is short but sweet. It offers mainly the same gameplay as the base game does, but switches up weapons and plasmids some. The story, however, is different. The DLC story brings back that twist that made the first Bioshock so much more engaging, right when a player may be losing interest in the plot. So I would say if you included the DLC of Bioshock 2, it is equal to Bioshock 1, but the base game by itself left me wanting more, which was satisfied, thankfully. Now, I'm not going to lie. At the start of Infinite, I did feel like it was a bit jarring in comparison to the past two titles. Graphically, the game is the best out of the bunch, but the style I had gotten accustomed to no longer existed. But giving the game some time, I found out within the first hour of the game that there was much more to the game than what was seen on its surface. In terms of gameplay, it still holds that original Bioshock feel, but it also introduced new and interesting plasmids to the mix. This is what the second Bioshock failed to do in an organic way. Also, instead of basing the game around power-ups, they streamlined the system into 4 pieces of gear that we can switch out at any time. Meaning, there was no more running back to a place that had the vendor to do so like in the previous games. Weapon upgrades also became a lot more accessible, but still felt balanced as I only invested in the weapons that I enjoyed using, like the good old shotgun. Later in the game, other interesting mechanics are added to the combat that continue to make the game quite entertaining. Staying true to the formula, Infinite also continues to deliver in the exploration department, but with such a change in scenery, the world of Infinite is much more fleshed out and exciting when it comes from Bioshock 2, as much of that scenery is just the same as the original. I of course found myself looking at every nook and cranny trying to gather up money or open up safes for some good stuff. The voxophones still exist as well, but are much more toned down, which to some may be a turn off, but to others I could see this being a positive, as you don't have to have someone providing you background to a situation for a large portion of the game. Story-wise, there's so much I want to say, but I want to keep this spoiler free just in case you haven't experienced the game yourself. The developers took the notion from Bioshock 1 though, and turned it up in terms of twists. This game has a lot of twists and turns that are beautifully crafted, and they don't feel like they were thrown together just to make ends meet. The plot hits you at the end, and it's not only confusing, but just fun to think about in your own way. Much like the original Bioshock, the enemies, the people, the interactions along the way make sense and mean a lot more once the end brings it all together. Not to mention, if the original game leaves you wanting more, then Part 1 and Part 2 of the Burial at Sea DLC will satisfy that desire and not only answer some questions you have, but also create even more. While there's so much I could say about the series overall, I will tell you for the $10 I spent on this, I do not regret it. It is not often you come across a game or even a trilogy nowadays with such strong gameplay elements, story elements, and just overall atmosphere. Bioshock Infinite to me was undoubtedly a great send-off to the series, as it brought things full circle and even a decade later, still pokes the minds of players till this day. I do understand that the series may not be for everyone, but if you have any interest in it, then pick up this trilogy and you won't be disappointed. When games like these are this good, it doesn't matter if you're like me and playing them 10 years later after their release or even 20 years after their release. That first time experience is all that matters.